Third party lost control seeing your soulmate with you. Plan number 1 of 3 failed. And plan number 2 is even more shocking. The third party lost control the moment they realized the one thing they had spent so much time trying to prevent was happening right in front of them. Your soulmate was with you, and they were not looking confused, guilty, or emotionally trapped the way this person had expected. They looked settled, comfortable, drawn toward you in a way that could not be explained away as coincidence or politeness. The third party had built an entire strategy around the belief that enough distance, enough doubt, and enough carefully placed interference could eventually weaken whatever remained between you and your soulmate. Plan number 1 depended on keeping the two of you emotionally separated long enough for uncertainty to do the work they could not do openly. They believed that if your soulmate stayed away from you, heard enough questions about you, and spent enough time inside a version of the story where reconnecting with you seemed complicated, eventually the connection would begin collapsing under its own unanswered questions. But when they saw your soulmate beside you, something inside them immediately understood that the first plan had failed. Not partially. Not temporarily. It had failed in the one way they had feared most. Despite everything that had been placed between you, your soulmate still moved toward you when given a real opportunity, and the ease between the two of you exposed how little control the third party had actually gained over what your soulmate felt. The reaction was subtle at first. The third party may not have created a dramatic scene immediately. People who have spent a long time trying to influence situations indirectly are often careful about revealing how much something affects them. They watched. They listened. They tried to measure what was happening between you. Perhaps you and your soulmate were simply standing close while speaking, but there was something in your soulmate's attention that made the third party uncomfortable. They were not scanning the room. They were not checking whether anyone else approved. They were listening to you with the particular focus of someone who had missed having access to a familiar emotional space. Maybe your soulmate smiled differently around you. Perhaps their shoulders relaxed. Maybe there was a brief moment when both of you laughed about something nobody else understood, the kind of small private recognition that reminds an outsider there is history here they cannot manufacture for themselves. That may have been the exact moment the third party realized the problem was much deeper than physical proximity. They had hoped distance would erase familiarity. Instead, being around each other again seemed to reactivate something that had never been destroyed in the first place. What the third party did not fully understand was that plan number 1 had never really been about keeping two bodies apart. It was about changing your soulmate's interpretation of you. They wanted your soulmate to begin associating you with difficulty, uncertainty, pressure, and emotional exhaustion. Perhaps they never openly said, "Do not be with this person." That would have been too obvious. Instead, they may have asked questions that sounded concerned. Are you sure you can trust them? Why would someone who truly loved you act that way? Maybe you are attached to the idea of them rather than who they really are. Questions like these can appear harmless when delivered at the right moment, especially when someone is already confused or hurt. The third party understood that doubt is more powerful when a person believes they discovered it themselves. So they did not necessarily need your soulmate to hate you. They only needed them to hesitate long enough for someone else to become easier. For a while, it appeared to work. Your soulmate became quieter. They questioned memories they once trusted. They may have started wondering whether they had romanticized the connection. Perhaps they pulled away, and from your side that withdrawal felt inexplicable because you did not know every voice contributing to the uncertainty. You may have sensed something had shifted without being able to identify the source. Conversations that once flowed became cautious. Your soulmate's warmth seemed to arrive in flashes and disappear before you could trust it. And every time you reacted to the inconsistency, the reaction itself could be used as further evidence against you. If you asked for clarity, someone could call you demanding. If you became quiet, someone could say you were manipulative. If you stepped away to protect your peace, the third party could interpret that as proof you never cared enough to fight. This was the design of plan number 1. Create conditions where almost anything you did could be interpreted in the least generous way possible. But there was a flaw. Your soulmate knew you beyond the version being described to them. That did not mean they were immune to influence. They were not. There were moments when doubts landed. There were periods when outside opinion sounded persuasive because they aligned with fears your soulmate already carried. Yet memories kept interfering with the new narrative. Your soulmate remembered things the third party had never witnessed. They remembered conversations when you were patient without gaining anything from it. They remembered kindness you showed when nobody was watching. They remembered moments when you had every reason to embarrass them or expose something private and chose not to. They remembered the way you looked at them when they were struggling, and something about those memories refused to fit comfortably inside the story that you had always been calculating, careless, or replaceable. The third party underestimated memory because they thought emotion could be redirected by repetition. But memory has its own stubborn intelligence. The more your soulmate tried to convince themselves you were simply part of the past, the more certain memories returned with details they had ignored the first time. They began noticing that some of their strongest doubts about you did not originate inside the relationship itself. They appeared after conversations with other people. They noticed how often they felt relatively clear about you until they spoke to the third party, then suddenly became anxious again. At first they dismissed this pattern. Eventually it became difficult to ignore. That was why seeing your soulmate with you mattered so much. It was evidence. Not proof that every problem had disappeared. Not proof that reunion was guaranteed. But proof that direct experience with you still carried more emotional weight than the third party's interpretation of you. Your soulmate could hear 100 warnings, but standing beside you allowed them to compare those warnings with the actual person in front of them. And the comparison was beginning to expose something. Perhaps the third party expected your soulmate to appear uncomfortable around you. Instead, your soulmate seemed calmer. Maybe they expected you to be confrontational. Instead, you did not behave like someone desperate to prove anything. You may have simply been yourself. That was enough. Sometimes the strongest defense against a distorted story is not a dramatic argument. It is behaving so differently from the accusation that the accusation begins looking strange on its own. The third party watched this happening in real time. That was when their control started slipping. They interrupted conversations. They found reasons to pull your soulmate away. Maybe they suddenly needed help with something unimportant. Perhaps they became louder, overly friendly, or strangely cold. Their behavior changed just enough that someone paying attention could sense the tension. Your soulmate noticed. And that was another mistake. Until then, your soulmate could tell themselves the third party's involvement came from concern. But genuine concern does not usually panic when the person you care about appears peaceful. If you supposedly represented danger, why did seeing your soulmate happy beside you create irritation rather than relief? Why did your presence make the third party competitive? Why did they need to regain your soulmate's attention the moment that attention rested comfortably on you? Your soulmate started watching them differently. Plan number 1 had been built around making your soulmate question you. Its failure caused your soulmate to begin questioning the third party instead. That reversal was not supposed to happen. Later, when the two of them were alone, the third party attempted to regain control of the situation. They may have tried to minimize what your soulmate had experienced. You are falling into the same pattern again. They know exactly how to pull you back. You looked different around them. That last statement may have been intended as criticism, but your soulmate heard it differently. Yes. They had felt different around you. For perhaps the first time in a long time, they had not been thinking about what everyone else believed. They were simply responding to what they themselves felt. That frightened the third party because independent feeling is dangerous to anyone whose influence depends on constant interpretation. Your soulmate asked them a question they were not expecting: why does this bother you so much? The third party may have denied it. They said they were only protecting your soulmate. They may have reminded them of old disappointments. Perhaps they brought up one of your mistakes from the past, something real enough to sound credible but incomplete enough to carry a meaning larger than it deserved. Your soulmate listened, but the old effect did not return as strongly. Because now there was something they could not unsee. The third party did not simply dislike the possibility that you could hurt your soulmate. They disliked the possibility that your soulmate could choose you despite their opinion. Those are not the same thing. That realization was the end of plan number 1. But the third party did not stop. This is where plan number 2 becomes more shocking, because instead of backing away after realizing their influence was weakening, they decided that doubt alone was no longer enough. They needed something that looked like evidence. They needed your soulmate to encounter information that appeared to confirm everything they had been warned about. The third party began searching for something they could use. Perhaps it was an old message. A photograph without context. A conversation with someone from your past. A social media interaction that could be presented in a particular way. The goal was not necessarily to fabricate an entire reality from nothing. Manipulation often works better when built around a small piece of truth. A real photograph can be paired with a false conclusion. A real conversation can be stripped of the explanation that makes it understandable. A real mistake can be presented as evidence of a permanent character trait. Plan number 2 depended on timing. The third party knew your soulmate was emotionally open toward you again. That meant any new doubt would need to arrive quickly, before trust had time to strengthen. They may have approached someone who had history with you. Perhaps someone who misunderstood you, disliked you, or had their own unresolved feelings about the past. The third party did not need this person to lie. They only needed them to tell the story from the most damaging angle. A conversation happened that your soulmate knew nothing about. Questions were asked about you. Old events were reopened. And eventually the third party obtained something they believed would be powerful enough to make your soulmate step back from you again. What they did not realize was that your soulmate had changed. The person receiving plan number 2 was no longer the same person who received plan number 1. Your soulmate had begun noticing patterns. So when the information reached them, their first reaction was intense, but not in the way the third party expected. They looked at what they were shown. Maybe a screenshot. Maybe a message. Maybe an old story involving another person. For a moment, your soulmate felt the familiar drop in their chest. That old fear returned. What if everyone else had been right? What if the closeness they felt with you had made them blind? The third party watched carefully. They thought they had won. Your soulmate became quiet. And the third party mistook silence for belief. But your soulmate's silence was not the silence of someone accepting the story. It was the silence of someone noticing something wrong. A date. A missing message. A detail that did not align with what they already knew. Perhaps the screenshot began halfway through a conversation. Maybe the third party described an event from a timeline your soulmate remembered differently. Maybe the person supposedly involved with you had once been mentioned openly, making the idea of a hidden betrayal inconsistent with something your soulmate already knew. Your soulmate asked to see the full conversation. The third party resisted. That was the second mistake. If something is being shown purely for clarity, why hide the context? Your soulmate asked again. Perhaps the third party became defensive. Why are you defending them? This is exactly what they do to you. You always find excuses. But now your soulmate heard the pressure underneath the words. Plan number 2 was supposed to prove you could not be trusted. Instead, it started revealing how badly the third party needed your soulmate to reach one specific conclusion. Your soulmate asked where the information came from. The answer became complicated. One person had sent it to another. Someone had heard something. A conversation had been summarized rather than shown. With every question, certainty weakened. Your soulmate felt anger, but the anger was beginning to change direction. They remembered something you once told them during an earlier conflict. If you ever hear something about me, ask me before deciding who I am. At the time, perhaps they had thought you were being defensive. Now the sentence felt reasonable. So your soulmate did something plan number 2 had not accounted for. They came to you. Not accusing. Not fully trusting either. They simply asked. The conversation may have been uncomfortable. You might have been hurt that old doubts were still finding their way between you. Perhaps part of you wanted to walk away immediately. You had already spent too much time defending yourself against stories created in rooms you were not standing in. But something about your soulmate's approach was different. They were not saying, "Prove you're innocent." They were saying, "I need to understand what I'm actually looking at." You explained the context. Maybe the message was real but the interpretation was false. Perhaps the person involved was someone you spoke to during a period when you and your soulmate were completely separated. Maybe the screenshot excluded the part where you clearly set a boundary. Perhaps the story involved something you had already told your soulmate long ago but which had been repackaged to appear secret. Your soulmate listened. Then they asked a question that changed everything. Who else knows about this? Your answer made their stomach drop. Very few people. And one of them was connected to the third party. Suddenly the information did not look accidental. Your soulmate went back through weeks of conversations in their mind. Questions the third party had asked. Comments that seemed casual. Moments when they wanted to know whether you and your soulmate were speaking again. The timing of the supposed revelation. The emotional reaction when they saw you together. Pieces started connecting. Plan number 2 had not only failed. It may have revealed plan number 1. Your soulmate began understanding that the interference was not a collection of random moments. It was a pattern. The third party had been watching the connection, reacting to changes, and adjusting their approach whenever something began moving in your favor. That realization created anger your soulmate had never allowed themselves to feel before. Not because someone disliked you. People are allowed to dislike other people. Not because someone offered advice. People are allowed to express concern. The anger came from recognizing that your soulmate's emotional vulnerability may have been used strategically. Their doubts were not simply listened to. They were fed. Their fears were not simply comforted. They were sometimes intensified. Your soulmate remembered moments when they felt ready to contact you and the third party suddenly reminded them of everything that could go wrong. They remembered one period when they had started speaking more warmly about you and almost immediately heard a new negative story. They remembered how the third party seemed calm whenever distance existed between you but became unsettled whenever reconciliation felt possible. Your soulmate could not ignore it anymore. They confronted them. At first, the third party denied everything. They said your soulmate was blaming them because they did not want to face the truth about you. They accused you of turning your soulmate against them. That accusation almost worked because it triggered one of your soulmate's oldest fears, that they were being manipulated and could not trust their own judgment. But then your soulmate asked something very simple. If they were controlling me, why were you the one trying to decide who I was allowed to believe? The third party had no clean answer. The conversation became heated. For the first time, your soulmate was not automatically reassuring them. They were asking direct questions. Why contact people connected to you? Why collect information? Why present pieces instead of full context? Why become angry after seeing the two of you together? The third party's calm began disappearing. This was the moment they truly lost control. They admitted enough to expose more than they intended. Perhaps they said they were tired of watching your soulmate run back to you. Perhaps they said they knew you would eventually take your soulmate away from everyone who cared about them. Maybe they accused you of always winning. That word, winning, changed the entire conversation. Because genuine concern is not supposed to be a competition. Your soulmate realized the third party had not been thinking only about their well-being. They had been thinking about their own position. Your presence represented a loss of influence. The closer your soulmate felt to you, the less necessary the third party became as interpreter, protector, advisor, or emotional center. And this is where the motive underneath Plan Number 1 and Plan Number 2 began coming into focus. The third party was afraid of becoming less important. Perhaps they had romantic feelings for your soulmate. Perhaps not. Sometimes jealousy is not purely romantic. A friend can fear losing emotional priority. A relative can fear losing influence. Someone who has become your soulmate's primary confidant can feel threatened when your soulmate begins making decisions independently. Whatever the exact form, the third party had become attached to being needed. Your connection threatened that role. Your soulmate saw it. And once they saw it, the past started looking different. They remembered advice that always led toward distance from you. They remembered how often the third party praised them when they ignored you. They remembered how uncomfortable this person became whenever your soulmate took responsibility for their own part in the relationship. Because if your soulmate accepted responsibility, you became less useful as a villain. And without a villain, the third party's role as protector became less powerful. This is the deeper reason seeing you together caused such an extreme reaction. The third party was not simply watching two people reconnect. They were watching an entire story they had helped maintain begin collapsing. But there is still Plan Number 3. And this may be the reason the situation is not fully over yet. Once Plan Number 2 failed, the third party understood that information alone might no longer separate you. Your soulmate had begun checking facts instead of accepting interpretations. Direct communication between you had become stronger. That meant Plan Number 3 would have to target something neither facts nor explanations could easily repair. Trust. Not trust between you and your soulmate. Trust between your soulmate and themselves. The third party knew one thing about your soulmate that you may also understand. When overwhelmed emotionally, your soulmate sometimes questions their own judgment. So Plan Number 3 may not involve attacking you directly at all. It may involve creating a situation designed to make your soulmate believe that reconnecting with you is causing damage elsewhere. A family conflict. A friendship suddenly threatened. Someone saying, "You've changed since they came back." A problem deliberately framed as the consequence of choosing you. The strategy would be simple. If the third party can no longer convince your soulmate that you are bad, perhaps they can convince them that loving you makes your soulmate bad. That is far more dangerous. Because guilt can accomplish what jealousy cannot. Your soulmate may be pressured to believe that choosing you means abandoning someone else, betraying family, becoming selfish, or repeating an old mistake. But there is one thing the third party does not know. Your soulmate is already starting to understand this pattern too. After plan number 2 collapsed, your soulmate became more careful about the difference between consequence and manipulation. They are asking questions they once avoided. Who benefits if I feel guilty? Who becomes more powerful when I doubt myself? Who supports my peace even when my choices are not the choices they would personally make? Those questions are changing how your soulmate understands loyalty. For a long time, they may have confused loyalty with compliance.